All right, so thank you everyone for joining us for our webinar today. Thank you. We are here with the UNH Alumni Relations, so we thank you for joining these webinar series and all of you who have joined over and over again. It's been a great interaction with alumni. Today, the webinar is Hope is the Thing with Feathers, Seabirds in New Hampshire, and Happy World Ocean Day as well. Today, our presenter is Dr. Liz Craig, who is the Tern Conservation Program Manager at Shoals Marine Laboratory. Her specific study system at UNH is the colony of threatened and endangered terns breeding at the Isles of Shoals. Through her research, Liz aims to better understand how these birds interact with their environment to address conservation and management issues. She has an undergraduate degree in ecology, evolution, and environmental biology from Columbia University, and a PhD in zoology and wildlife conservation from Cornell. We will be answering questions throughout the presentation and at the end as well. So please note at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little Q&A section. That is where you will input your questions. We will see them and answer them as the presentation goes along, and like I said, at the end as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Liz. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And thank you guys for joining us today. Again, my name's Liz Craig. You can call me Liz. Some of you may have been expecting to see Dr. Jen Seavey here this morning. Jen is our executive director at Shoals Marine Lab and was unfortunately unable to make it today. So she asked that I speak in her place about the seabird work that we're doing out at Shoals. So in addition to celebrating World Oceans Day today by talking about seabirds, I imagine most of you joining us on this webinar are also interested in birds generally and would be excited to hear, if you don't know about it already, that just this past week we celebrated the first ever and hopefully the first annual Black Birders Week. This was a series of online events celebrating Black scientists, scholars, and naturalists with an aim at increasing the visibility of Black birders who face really unique challenges and dangers when engaging in outdoor activities. So this was a really great opportunity to hear and to amplify Black voices in the bird community. And so I encourage you to hop on social media after this to explore the content from last week. Now, I know a lot of you all are UNH alumni and maybe some Shoals Marine Lab alumni out there. But for those of you who are not familiar with Shoals Marine Lab, we are a summer field station and research institute located on Appledore Island in the Gulf of Maine. We are jointly run by the University of New Hampshire and Cornell. And our primary focus is on undergraduate education. We offer hands-on, immersive summer credit courses and research internships on a real diversity of topics from the fundamentals of ecology and animal behavior to applied sustainable engineering solutions. We also provide public education programs as well as college-level courses for high school students. Obviously, this summer is a bit different for us as it is for all of you. This year, in response to COVID-19, we've shifted a number of our typical on-island immersive summer programs to virtual instruction. So I wanted to draw your attention to our website. We have a Shoals live stream page on our website. If you're interested in engaging in some of this live content, that we'll be generating and curating throughout the summer, you can sign up for our weekly updates about what's going to be on our live stream, and you can also find it here on our website. Right now we're hosting weekly seminars, so please join us tomorrow night for our Rock Talk series, our online seminar series. Okay, but now to transport you out to the Isles of Shoals. Here is a map. Oops, here we go. A map showing the Gulf of Maine region. If you're familiar with UNH, you'll recognize Durham, New Hampshire is right here. And just off the coast, about 6 miles off the coast of New Hampshire, is the Isles of Shoals archipelago. This is a aerial image of the Isles of Shoals archipelago. And I mentioned that Shoals Marine Lab's island campus is located on Appledore Island, which is right here. But today, since we're talking about seabirds, now there are seabirds breeding all over the Isles of Shoals, but I'm going to be talking specifically about terns today, a specific group of seabirds. And out at Shoals, the terns all breed just south of the border, which is New Hampshire, on White and Seavey Islands. So we'll be spending most of the time on White and Seavey Islands virtually today. So I myself am one of the lucky researchers that gets to work out at Shoals. And I'm excited to talk with you guys today about the tern conservation work and research that we're conducting. And I'd like to start with some acknowledgements. First of all, to the leadership of this program, which is Dr. Jen Seavey and myself as co-PIs of the tern conservation program. I want to give an extra special thank you to our 2020 tern technicians who are operating, helping us operate this program under really extraordinary circumstances, extraordinary conditions in the face of COVID-19 this year. And I'll talk a bit more about what that looks like. But an extra special thank you to Alia Caldwell and Beckley Stearns, who are working with us this year, as well as a special thanks to all the techs who spent the summer making this project happen. I also want to thank our research collaborators, both at UNH and beyond. I'll talk about some of the research we're doing with these collaborators, with some of these collaborators. I won't get to touch on all of it, but in case I don't, special thanks to Gemma Klukas from Cornell, Dr. Gemma Klukas from Cornell, Dr. Greg Moore from UNH, and Dr. Nathan Fury also from UNH. And I'll get in a bit to the research collaborations we're conducting with them. And then, of course, special thanks to the funders and partners. This is a very, it's a long-standing program. There's been a long history of support from many organizations. I'd like to give a particular thank you to New Hampshire Fish and Game, who's an incredible leader in conservation management of terns in New Hampshire. Okay, so to dive into our program first, probably want to know, why are we talking about conservation of terns? Why are we talking about conservation of seabirds? So for a bit of context, there are about 350 bird species in the world that we call seabirds. They are birds that rely on marine resources for their own food to raise their young. So of those about 350 species of seabirds, about 100 of them are threatened on a global level. And another 35 are listed as near threatened. It's basically, if you look at this pie chart, everything except the green pieces of the pie makes up about half of the world's seabirds. So about half of the world's seabirds are either suspected or known to be experiencing population declines. And this makes this group of birds, seabirds, the most threatened group of birds on Earth. So I want to talk a bit about what those threats are. Now, this list that I've included is a short list. These are big topics, but there's obviously a lot more threats to seabirds than I've listed here. But what you see here are probably the top 4. And the interesting thing about this list, which I'll go through, is that these threats are not unique to seabirds. In fact, they are the same threats that threaten biodiversity worldwide. So habitat loss, I think, makes the top of the list. In terms of seabirds, we're talking about habitat destruction, development of coastal habitats that these birds are using to breed. So we're talking about beaches and marshes and islands, which we as humans love to develop and spend our time on. So these are susceptible to habitat degradation and loss. Climate change is an enormous issue for seabirds. If we're talking about ocean warming trends and sea level rise, certainly sea level rise affects marsh breeding environments, island breeding environments by reducing their size. But we're also talking about really fundamental changes to food web structure that go on as we see changes in ocean patterns of ocean temperature. Overharvesting is another major factor that should be near the top of this list. In the case of seabirds, we're talking about overfishing. the birds that we're studying in New Hampshire, and also seabirds throughout the world, are relying on fish populations that we as humans also rely on. So these are the same commercially important fish that you and I like to see on our menus that are critical to the economies, particularly here in New England. These are the same fish that the birds rely on. So there's definitely a shared interest in fish and a threat of overfishing for these birds. And then finally, well, not finally, just the end of the short list would be pollution, including, environmental contaminants of all types. Plastic pollution, microplastic pollution has been one that's really come to the forefront in the last few years. So this is a daunting list, I'll be the first to admit, but the way that I see this list is a list of opportunities for conservation intervention. So all of the research that we do is really aimed at asking questions about these threats. How specifically are they impacting birds? And by asking those questions in a directed way, we can then create conservation interventions that will help chip away at some of these threats. So these are really opportunities for conservation action. So in light of that, our program, the Tern Conservation Program, implements restoration, management, and research of threatened and endangered terns. We have 3 species of terns in New Hampshire, the common, roseate, and Arctic tern, that are all breeding on the Isles of Shoals. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to do is introduce terns a bit. Folks who are from the coast of New England, or almost anywhere around the world, in fact, have probably seen a tern in their lives. You may not have recognized it, but terns are small seabirds. They are closely related to gulls. They're in the gull family. They are different from gulls, at least visually. You can tell the difference because of that black cap. So the 3 pictures I have here, the common, roseate, and Arctic terns, they may look really similar to each other, but they do all share that black cap. They also like to dive into the surf to catch their fish, which is a little different than what you typically see with gulls. So if you've seen a small seabird with a black cap diving in the water, this is probably a tern. I mentioned the 3 species that we have include the common tern, which is threatened in the state of New Hampshire as well as the state of Maine. The roseate tern is state and federally endangered. And the Arctic tern is not listed here in New Hampshire because we are at the very, very southern terminus of where this bird breeds. You typically expect to see them breeding much higher, further north in the Arctic. But they do breed here in New Hampshire. And so for that reason, we're very interested in observing a species at the edge of its range, because that tends to be where you see biodiversity degrade, is at the edges of ranges. So despite not being listed in New Hampshire, it is of conservation interest to us, and it is also threatened in the state of Maine. So what these birds have in common with one another, they're all long-lived. In the bird world, that means 20 to 30 years of age. That's a 30-year-old tern is quite an old tern. They're all long-distance migrants. The Arctic tern actually holds the record for the longest distance migration of any animal on Earth. There's a study from a few years back that clocked a Arctic tern traveling 60,000 miles in 1 year. For a bit of context, the circumference of the Earth is only about 2,500 miles. So we're talking about an annual migration that covers twice the circumference of the Earth. These animals are covering a lot of ground, basically following the sun around in order to follow the food. They're following primary productivity, which is driving fish availability. So these guys, despite being really small, are traveling huge distances, huge migratory feats every year. And despite those really long distances that they're traveling, they still come back to the same exact locations. They tend to come back to the same locations every year to breed. So they have very high site fidelity. Oftentimes, they're coming back to breed to the same location where they were hatched as a chick. So this is incredible in terms of an animal finding its place across the whole globe. It's also really valuable information for us as conservation biologists to have, because if we know that a colony has existed in one location in previous years, it's very likely that the birds from that colony will come back to the same location in the future. And that helps us make decisions and protect those locations that we know are important to them. It's a really important part of our tool set to be able to protect these birds. The other helpful thing about the biology of these species in terms of protecting them is that they're very highly defensive of their nesting colonies. So if you've ever wandered near a tern nest, maybe on a beach somewhere or onto an island, you probably know, because the terns would let you know. They will dive bomb and poop on you and make a lot of noise. And so that's really great if like me, your job is to protect these birds. It's great that the birds are helping to protect themselves as well. And the fact that they like to poop on you, actually, we take some good advantage of, which I'll talk about later. It's really great that they're so generous with their poop samples. The last thing I wanted to mention is that all three of these species, terns generally, also rely on small fish and aquatic invertebrates to feed themselves and to feed their young. And we'll talk a lot more about the diet of these birds, but they rely on small fish because, unlike us, they can't chew. So they have to swallow their prey whole. And being small seabirds, they're limited by the size of their gape. So really, they're only fishing for small fish. For those birders out there, I just figured I would zoom in a bit more on these species. As I mentioned, they do look really similar to one another. If you're interested in trying to tell them apart, focus on the bills first. That's what I find to be most helpful. The common tern has a sort of orangey red bill with a black tip. The roseate tern has an all black bill, at least this time of year. It does change throughout the year. And then the Arctic tern has a solid raspberry red bill. They also sound really different if you, well, not really different. They sound a little different if you like to bird by ear. So these are actually a really fun challenge if you're a birder looking to tell your coastal species apart. We know they spend a lot of time in Great Bay and along the coast in New Hampshire, so keep your eyes out for these birds. Okay, so for some historic context about terns nesting on the Isles of Shoals in particular, historically the Isles of Shoals supported the most significant tern colony documented in the Gulf of Maine, and that colony was located on Lunging Island, which is just north of White and Seavey, where we are operating now. This population persisted up until about the mid-1950s, at which point terns were extirpated from the region due to a variety of factors. Particularly in the case of this colony, it had a lot to do with changes in human use of the islands, but it was also likely exacerbated by population declines, which resulted from a number of things like poaching of birds for feathers to support the millinery trade for feathers on women's hats earlier in the century, as well as environmental contaminants like DDT and PCBs around that time. Oh, sorry. So that's some historical context up until the 1950s. In 1997, New Hampshire began the tern restoration program as we know it today to try to attract birds back to this region. And this is alongside efforts throughout further north in the Gulf of Maine that were similarly trying to bring seabirds back to islands in the Gulf of Maine. So in 1997, New Hampshire began this effort. They did it by, and I say they because it's before my time, by resuming human presence on White and Seavey Islands that helped to control the gull population that had become established there, as well as cormorants, other birds, competing birds that breed there. And then in order to get terns to settle in and recognize that White and Seavey Islands would be a good nesting spot, the biologists used social attraction. This takes advantage of the social nature of these birds. They like to nest in colonies. They don't particularly like to be pioneers. They don't want to be the first in a place. It's much safer to be surrounded by the rest of your colony mates. There's lots of other benefits that birds derive from being in a colony. So the biologists would use decoys and play calls of seabirds, of terns, to make it look like and sound like there was an active nesting colony at this site. In fact, I have one of the decoys here that you can see in this photo. Those aren't real terns, those are these decoys. And so by creating the illusion of an active nesting colony, you can get real live birds to come in and check it out in a way that they wouldn't if it was just an empty island. And in fact, these biologists were successful in attracting real live birds their very first year. And so here you can see the population trends since 1997. On the left is the graph for common terns, and actually you can see roseate and Arctic terns are there at the bottom as well. But on the right, I've just picked out the roseate and Arctic terns so that you can see those trends. So you can see a very precipitous increase in common terns in the early years of this program, and then they've reached about 3,000 pairs in recent years and remained relatively steady. In comparison, the roseate tern took a little longer to establish. This is our less common and federally and state endangered species, the roseate tern being the endangered species, has shown, except for this early bump, which I'd be happy to answer questions about why this might have happened, these birds showed a very reasonable increase in population over time and are continuing on that trajectory, we hope. Arctic terns, as I mentioned, this is a really peripheral southern colony for them. We never expect to see a lot of Arctic terns, so their populations are always pretty low. They've continued to be, I think, increasingly low, lower and lower in recent years. So far, this year, we've been very lucky to find one Arctic tern nest on the island. So they are there as well. But this is a real success story, a real conservation restoration success story, that these birds are here at all. And they're doing quite well, at least in terms of their population size. So these days, we continue this work. We don't need to do social attraction anymore because the birds are already, given their site fidelity, we've had over 20 years of successful nesting on this island, and new birds recruiting new chicks that then grow up a few years later and come back to the same colony. So we don't need to attract any new birds. They're attracting one another. But we do continue our human presence on the island for other reasons. So from May through September, we maintain presence on the island to keep predators at bay. Gulls in particular, we don't allow to nest on the island. We encourage them to move on when we see them. We're also doing other types of management, particularly, I said predator management and habitat management, to make sure that this one island that these birds have is optimal in terms of the habitat quality. And that's a project we're working on with Dr. Greg Moore. I won't get to talk anymore today about the habitat management, but I wanted to mention that is an active area of our research. And then the meat and potatoes of what we do is conservation research and monitoring to continue to understand more and more about these populations. So, before I move on to talk a bit about the specifics of our research and monitoring, I wanted to just briefly mention that what I've just described to you is a very typical scenario of what we're able to do on the islands by being out there from May through September. We typically take shifts on and off the island, a small team of myself and a few technicians. This summer, we're really, really incredibly lucky that we're able to continue to do some of this work, but we're not doing it business as usual. In fact, our technicians are stuck, isolated on this island for the whole summer. And besides myself, who spend most of the time on the colony and leave occasionally to provision the team, we're not having any interactions with the outside world. So it's a bit different this year, but we're incredibly grateful that we're able to do this work. And it turns out that an isolated island is a great place to work during a pandemic, if you can get people to agree to do it. So again, I wanted to thank the team. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, we do think about the contemporary threats to the conservation of seabirds when we're thinking about what we want to study and what we want to monitor for this population. And so our research and monitoring topics span a lot of those threats. So We're doing a lot of work studying the diet and foraging behavior of these birds. We're looking into contaminants and microplastics in their diet. We study the movement and migration for a lot of reasons, as well as adaptive habitat management, which I mentioned. Today, because of just the amount of time that we have together, I thought I'd focus just on the diet and foraging behavior research that we're doing. So I'll hop right into that now. Okay, so first of all, why study diet and foraging behavior of these birds? Why are we particularly interested in diet? So seabirds generally, and terns are included in this. These birds are apex predators in ocean environments, in marine environments, which makes them excellent indicators of ocean health. So everything that's going on in the food web, in the marine environment, these birds are reflecting all of that. By sampling at the top of the food web, you can learn something about everything that's going on underneath them. They're a great canary in the coal mine for marine systems. So they're valuable from that perspective to understand and to indicate our ocean health. The diet of these birds can also teach us a lot about the availability and condition of commercially important fish stocks. So I mentioned already that these birds are consuming a lot of the same species that we actively fish. You'll see herring and hake, pollock, that all shows up in the diet of these birds. Redfish, maybe you guys have gotten redfish recently from your local fishermen. These birds are eating redfish as well. So we can, and we are trying to actively learn about or use our information that we can gather from the seabirds, who are gathering information from the fish out there, to better understand the fisheries that we rely on commercially. And then finally, of course, that's what we learn from the birds. But in order to protect the birds themselves, given that these are threatened and endangered species, we really need to understand what food resources and habitats are important to the birds themselves in order to protect them. So from a conservation perspective, this information about diet is valuable just in and of itself. So historically, oh, do I hear a question?
Yeah, we do have a question.
Yes.
Just wanted to get that in. It says, was there a reason for the dip in population in what looked like around 2018?
Yes. Yes, there was a big dip in population in 2018. This was the year we had a lot of owls. In the winter, we had a lot of owls in the region, snowy owls in particular. We were a real boom that year, and we had owls staying out at the Isles of Shoals much later than we would typically see. And so there was an owl that spent the month of May on the colony and was disrupting the birds. And what we saw was a big rebound after that year, and we were very relieved to see that. But predators are a major issue, and a giant seabird colony like this is very attractive to predators. It's a great question. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions before I move on?
No, not right now. I'll let you know.
Great. Okay, so we talked a little bit already about why we're interested in diet. How do we study diet, though? There's been a long history, both at this site and at other tern nesting sites throughout the Gulf of Maine, of monitoring chick provisioning. And by chick provisioning, I mean when adult birds are coming into the colony and bringing a fish to feed their chick. And these birds, unlike gulls or penguins or some other birds you might have seen that regurgitate already semi-digested fish for their chicks, these birds feed their chicks a whole fish. And that means that if a biologist is sitting on the colony with some binoculars, or we actually have a remote view camera that we use for research as well, if you're visually able to see the birds coming in, you can make observations about what they're feeding their chicks. So for the last 20 plus years, biologists in New Hampshire have been making these types of observations. Each nest gets about 2 hours of observation, about 4 times a week. And Alia Caldwell, one of our techs this summer, and also an incoming UNH graduate student, put this graph together, updating our historic diet data. So basically what you see here, this is just a quick look at some of the diet observations from the last 20 years. Each vertical bar is 1 year, and each color represents a different fish. And so you can see some of the most common fish, the most important fish in the tern's diet are herring and hake. Other important fish are mackerel and pollock and sand lance. These are all major contributors to the diet. You can see some interannual variation in that as well. Butterfish, I want to call out in particular. This, I don't know if any of you guys have seen this fish. I've started to see it showing up in fishermen's nets. People are trying to sell butterfish. I bet butterfish is delicious. But from the perspective of a tern, which has a really narrow bill, the butterfish is a very wide, it's shaped almost like a goldfish cracker. It's very deep-bodied, but narrow side to side. So from above, it's narrow side to side laterally, so it looks like a nice skinny fish that a tern might want to eat. But if you turn it on its side, it's very deep-bodied. And here's a photo of a tern chick trying to swallow a butterfish. It tends to be too wide for the bird's gape. And so oftentimes you'll see lots of these butterfish coming in the bills of adults, and then the chick tries to eat it and fails, and you find them just discarded on the colony. The butterfish is a warm water fish, or a warmer water fish. It prefers warmer waters than our hake and herring and pollock. And as many of you probably know, you may have seen this figure from Pershing et al. The Gulf of Maine is warming. Our waters are warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans. So we are seeing rapid warming trends in the Gulf of Maine. And what we see here, this graph at the bottom right, is actually our seabird diet data. On the x-axis, this is the average water temperature in July when these birds are feeding their chicks. On the y-axis is the proportion of butterfish in the tern diet in New Hampshire. And what you see is a significant increase of butterfish in the diet as temperatures get warmer. And we do predict that temperatures will continue to warm. And so butterfish may continue to increase in terms of proportion in the diet. And by proportion in the diet, I mean how many are getting brought back to the colony, not necessarily how many are able to be swallowed. So this is a bit worrying. It tells us that maybe terns aren't able to adapt as quickly as the environment is changing. I want to give a special shout out here to a UNH undergrad, Olivia Smith, who's been working on this question of butterfish in tern diet with us at UNH. And she's going to be working on a internship project this summer with us as well, continuing to investigate butterfish. So thanks, Olivia. Okay, on to another aspect of diet that we're studying. We have an exciting new genomics approach that's being spearheaded by Dr. Gemma Klukas. Gemma started this work as a postdoc here at UNH with Adrian Kovac. So a bit of context here. These visual observations that I've been talking about, they're very time intensive to collect. They require a substantial amount of training to be able to identify, as that bird goes by really fast with that fish, to identify what type of fish it was. So it's also prone to observational error. In addition, we're watching adult birds come in to feed a fish to their chick. It doesn't necessarily tell us what the adult birds are consuming themselves when they're out in the environment. So this genomics approach basically allows us to identify fish species by amplifying fish DNA that we find in the poop of the birds. So basically, a fish goes through the digestive tract of a bird, the DNA comes out the other end relatively unaffected, and we're able to amplify and sequence the DNA in order to identify what species of fish went into that bird's mouth, which is incredibly cool. So just to show you a little bit of what these data look like. These are two bar graphs. On the left, these are the fish that show up in the fecal DNA. And on the right, these are fish that we're able to observe through binoculars. And what you can see right away is that there's just a much longer list, much higher diversity of fish that we're able to detect using the genomics approach. In comparison to the visual approach, where we're really only picking out 4 or 5 fish with any great confidence. So already it's incredibly valuable in helping us better understand the type of fish that these birds are relying on, way more than we would be able to to glean visually. However, if we want to compare apples to apples, so basically what I've done here is collapsed all that diversity on the DNA side into similar categories, like for instance, all the different species of herring that visually we just see as herring. If I collapse those together, all the hake together, what you see is that actually we're getting a very similar picture of the diet of the birds using these two methods. So that's very encouraging to us, that even though we can get way more information, at least in terms of the species ID using DNA, that actually it is corroborating what we're seeing in the field visually. So I want to give a real extra special shout out to Gemma for this work. Gemma, it was just announced this weekend that she received a Science Communication Prize from the World Seabird Union for her Twitter communication about this project. So congrats to Gemma. We're all super excited about this project, and congrats to you for this prestigious award and for your awesome use of Twitter. Okay. So just to finish up, I want to talk about one last aspect of the work that we're doing with foraging behavior. Let me see, yeah, here we go. So the diet of these birds is constrained by a lot of things. Obviously, it's constrained by the size of the fish. We've talked about that already. The overall abundance of fish. They can only get as much fish as is in the environment. It's also really constrained by the timing of fish availability. The birds are only here from May through August, so the fish has to be there at that particular time when it's just in time for the chicks to grow. And also, these birds rely on there being fish within a reasonable distance from their colony. If they have to fly and bring that fish all the way back for their chicks, they can only fly so far. So we're studying those last two aspects of these constraints, the timing and location of fishing, by using GPS tagging of terns. So we're using GPS tags. You can see a tag on this bird here. To track the movements of terns at fine scales, to better understand their foraging behavior within this Gulf of Maine landscape, and also to identify foraging hotspots that are particularly important for this colony of terns. We can then follow up with boat-based sampling of fish populations at those same foraging hotspots to understand how the diet of the birds compares directly to the underlying fish community in those same exact areas. So basically, this will elucidate how closely the seabird diet matches with the fisheries the fishery in New Hampshire. And that will help us to incorporate some of this amazing long-term seabird diet data that we've been collecting for all these years, to incorporate it into fisheries population modeling, as well as management decision-making in this region. And there have been some really great examples in recent years of fisheries biologists and managers using seabird data like this to fill information gaps about fisheries, particularly in the herring fishery. So our work is aimed to bolster that type of collaboration. And these fine-scale movement data, of course, can be used to address all kinds of other questions. One notable one being to evaluate the risk of these birds to offshore development, like wind development, as wind farms are going to be proliferating in the Gulf of Maine in the coming years. So first I just want to acknowledge that really cool map that we were watching was put together by Nate Hamilton. I want to acknowledge both Alia Caldwell and Nate Hamilton, who are UNH grad students in Nathan Fury's lab. These two students are working with us on a New Hampshire Sea Grant funded Seabird research project, which we're calling Seabirds as Indicators of New Hampshire Fisheries. So congrats to the two of you for the good work you've done so far, and we're really looking forward to continuing this project with you. Okay, so I think that's all I'll share for now in terms of diet and foraging behavior work. And of course, there's so much more that we could talk about, but I'll leave it there for now. And I just want to wrap up by sharing some of my own thoughts and feelings about these birds and what a sign of hope they are in our lives. I'd reiterate that I'm so grateful that our team is able to conduct work this summer in isolation on the island when so much other research has had to be put on hold. And in the broader sense, just in any year, it's amazing to see these birds return year after year to the same small outcropping of rock at the Isles of Shoals to raise their young, despite all the challenges that they face, despite their cross-continental migration. It's truly an incredible sight in any year. And this year, more than ever, it's been particularly reassuring to observe them going about their lives as usual when so much else in our world is in upheaval. So with that, if you're interested in learning more or getting more involved, I really encourage you to check out Shoals Marine Lab courses and public programs. If you're from New Hampshire, maybe you've already got a conservation license plate. If not, you could certainly get a conservation license plate. The money you spend goes to New Hampshire Fish and Game and supports research like what and conservation efforts like what we are conducting out at Shoals. So that's one great way to show support. And then finally, if we want to affect positive change for seabirds and for wildlife and for our world's oceans, let's all commit to vote. Vote for candidates who prioritize environmental protection, and more than anything, vote for candidates that who share your values. Okay, with that, I'd love to take any other questions if you have them.
Yes, we have quite a few questions actually. So the first one is, what are the tern's biggest threat in terms of predators?
So it really depends on the time of year, but during the breeding season, obviously the colony itself is vulnerable. You know, it's a lot of birds, thousands of birds nesting in one place. They can protect themselves to some extent, but they are certainly vulnerable to predation by gulls. If any of you have spent time on Appledore Island or even heard about the gulls of Appledore Island, they are the apple of our eye on Appledore Island. There are tons of gulls breeding there, and we love them dearly. They are also really important native seabirds in our region, but they are predators also of terns. And so gulls, blackback gulls and herring gulls will both predate tern eggs and chicks, and blackback gulls will also predate tern adults. So they are the biggest threat because they are our closest neighbors in terms of predation.
Great. The next question is, approximately how many chicks does an adult need to feed? Does it take a while for them to go back and forth to make sure they are all fed?
Okay, so a typical clutch size is how many eggs a bird will lay in its nest. A typical clutch size is 2 to 3 eggs at this colony. Sometimes you'll see 4. Most of those eggs do typically hatch. The hatch rate is pretty high, but the survival rate of all those chicks is not as high. At this colony anyway, these birds will be lucky if they raise 1 chick successfully. So 1 would be a high average for us. Some birds manage to raise 2, some of them don't manage to raise any. And there's lots of reasons why there's mortality of chicks. But if they're lucky, they'll have 1 to 2 chicks that will fledge, and it takes a lot of work to feed them. So both of the parents, they both fish in order to provision their chicks, and typically we see about 1 feeding per hour, maybe a little higher or lower depending on the year and how far the bird has to go. So 1 feeding per hour with 2 adults means that the bird, each bird is probably feeding every other hour or so. We do see them occasionally doing foraging trips at night, but most of that feeding is happening in the morning and in the afternoon.
The next question is, do you offer volunteer programs to help with this work?
So in a typical year, I would say there's lots more opportunities for volunteers. We take great advantage of Shoals Marine Lab's amazing wealth of volunteers, specifically during Volunteer Weekend, which we typically hold at Shoals in May. This year, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of opportunities, hands-on opportunities for volunteers, just like you've probably experienced with a lot of other organizations out there. but there are definitely opportunities to get involved as a volunteer. So if you're interested, please do reach out.
The next question is, when do terns begin nesting?
So in terms of the time of year, terns, I mentioned, are really long distance migrants. And so they're the common tern, for instance, our common tern population, most of them are likely spending their winter in Argentina. And so they have to come all the way back from Argentina to here before they can establish their nest. They typically arrive here in early May, first to second week of May, and are establishing nests in mid to late May. And that's later than most of the other birds in our region. By that point, the gulls and cormorants and all the other birds have pretty much already gotten started. So that's one of the reasons that these birds are particularly at risk and are particularly reliant on human management, because since they come back so late, if we weren't there to basically reserve the island and keep the gulls away in the spring, there would be nowhere left for them to establish a colony. So we are doing that work, and other managers throughout the Gulf of Maine and really across the continent, even for inland breeding terns, are doing the same work. So this is really a conservation dependent group of birds. And if, just in case you were, if I interpreted your question wrong, if you meant when do they start to breed age-wise, they're typically starting to breed at age 3 or 4 years old. So the first couple of years they're hanging around. Sometimes we do see them on the colony. Sometimes you see them trying to establish a nest, but not very successfully. But by the time they're 3 to 4 years of age, they're starting to breed.
There's a question that connects a little bit there. It says, do they mate for life?
So, there's exceptions to every rule. We do consider terns to be socially monogamous in that they have typically one male and one female per nest. That they do occasionally engage in extra pair copulation. That's a very common thing in colonies with so many other birds around, to just shop around a little bit. But it is typically two birds raising one group of chicks. And we have, there is a long history of studying these birds that find that they do pair with the same individuals year after year. It's not necessarily a whole lifetime bond. If they are successful in raising chicks together in 1 year, they're very likely to get back together to raise chicks again the following year. But they're if things haven't gone very well, if they are not successful in raising chicks, that reduces the probability that they'll breed together again in the future. We call that divorce.
Monogamous birds. Who knew?
Sometimes.
There's another question that says, what are the dates of the breeding cycle here in the Gulf of Maine? When do they arrive, lay eggs, hatch, fledge, and leave, typically?
Yeah, so we already talked about the arrival and egg laying. So they're arriving in early May and laying eggs in mid-May. It takes them about 3 weeks to incubate their eggs. So by mid to late June, the majority of the birds are probably starting to hatch. Their chicks are growing in late June throughout July. And by late July, those baby chicks are already flying. And we call them fledged when they're flying around. But in fact, fledged in this case does not mean independent. They are able to kind of leave the nest cup and move around. But these chicks continue to be provisioned by their parents for a long time. In fact, recent studies have shown that actually mom, the female, she takes off on her southern migration in the fall first, leaving the male behind with the chicks to continue the fall migration, to continue to provision them throughout the staging and migration, and then follow them all the way south. I don't think we yet know how long that lasts, how long those family groups stay together, but we know they stage and migrate as family groups together. And by that, we're talking about August and September, when you see big congregations of birds around the Cape Cod.
The next question is, are there other tern colonies in northern New England?
Definitely. Yep, there are tern colonies throughout the Gulf of Maine. In fact, we have a wonderful Gulf of Maine Seabird working group that coordinates all of the seabird colony managers and researchers in the region. And there are, in addition to the New Hampshire site, there are sites throughout Maine that are manned by biologists and volunteers and interns all summer to do the same kind of management and monitoring that we are doing. So yes, they are here. They're all over the region.
Okay, and we have another question. You showed really interesting DNA data. How do you separate the DNA from what the fish are eating and the DNA from the fish the parents are feeding their chicks?
Yeah, yes, that is a huge question, a very, very good question, and it's a tough one. We don't have a great answer yet, but so when a bird is eating a fish, obviously we're relying on the DNA of that fish to survive the digestion process. But whatever was in the belly of that fish is also likely to survive the digestion process. We call that secondary consumption. Basically, the bird is eating something inside the fish. And it's a bit hard to tease out. So Gemma's been thinking a lot about this question. We've certainly been thinking about doing feeding experiments where we know what's in the stomach and trying to tease that apart, but it's definitely one of the major considerations in terms of how to interpret the data. It's a really great question. It's a hard one for us.
There's a question, are you also banding these chicks?
Yes. Yeah, so we use bands to uniquely identify these birds. I wonder if you can see, oh, it's a little bit shadowed in this photo, but this bird that's sitting on one of our technicians' heads actually has 2 bands on it. It's a little bit shaded. I wonder if I have a better, well, anyway. So we band these birds with a federal band that we get from the USGS bird banding lab. So each bird has a unique ID, but we also use plastic field readable bands on the other leg that have a 3-digit alphanumeric code and also a color, so that we can, from a distance with binoculars, identify these birds without having to retrap them, because these are small birds, the bands are really small, they're hard to read. So we're using this in order to keep track of chicks throughout the season, basically so we can recapture and measure the growth of chicks. That's an important part of what we do. But it also helps us keep track of adults in the population and in the broader, what we call metapopulation, basically these interconnected colonies across the Gulf of Maine. A lot of us are color banding birds, and we're using special combinations of colors and letters to indicate where the bird is from. So we can get a lot of information just by using binoculars without having to interfere with the birds any more than that. It's a really valuable tool for us.
And it looks like the final question is there anything we can do in particular to ensure we are helping to conserve these terns?
That's a really great question. The conservation of these species is tricky. We are here in New Hampshire, and we care so much about our New Hampshire environment, and we can do everything that we can to try to protect birds here. And sometimes that's the only thing we can do. So whether it's, donating to a charity that's doing good work, buying your New Hampshire conservation license, donating to Shoals Marine Lab, being careful, especially during staging and migration, to respect birds on the beaches because they're starting to move through. So being careful to leash your dogs on the beach during migration season. These are all things that we can do here in New Hampshire to protect birds. Being politically active and voting for your values is really important. Everything from environmental protection to regulations about fisheries, whatever the aspect is that you're thinking of, those decisions get made oftentimes by politicians. So, but to get back to the big picture question, these birds are global citizens. They are traveling across the world. And so they are also our opportunities to make connections globally, to biologists in other countries. And this is a harder thing for us all to do, but I know me personally, I think these birds are an awesome provide an awesome opportunity to build connections. That's something we can do so much more of. They travel so far, and we are, many of us, kind of stuck where we are. So being able to build connections through these birds to help improve the conservation outcome of terns is an important thing to me.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. That was our final question. Just want to let people know that we always follow up after the webinars. We will put this in a library online if you have others that want to tune in and watch the great presentation. And we will also provide some follow-up materials from shoals so you can know more about when things get back to normal, how we can volunteer, help, visit, etc. But for now, we are going to log off and just say thank you so much, Liz. This was great. And I can see everyone stayed on and was really interested in great questions. So thank you so much for your help with this.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great rest of your Monday, and we will see you on the next webinar. Thanks.